So welcome, everybody. My name is Mary Scholl, and I am the Executive Director at the Institute for Collaborative Learning, also known as Centro Espiral Maná, for those of you that were with us in our early years. We're really happy to be with you. We're so happy that 640 plus of you have showed up to be with us today. We're grateful to the U.S. Embassy for the support that they've given over the years, not just this year, but ever since I've been in Costa Rica for 20 years, and I've seen how much support they've given in the 20 years that I've been here. And we're grateful for this year that they've given us the support to do these webinars with you all, as well as some other courses that we've been doing. We're also really grateful to the Ministry of Public Education, to the Minister, the Vice Minister for giving us permission, and to the national advisors for working with us to create these webinars. And we're really grateful to you. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're just really excited about sharing this today. Before we dive in, I also want to mention Ivan Suazo is here, and he is going to be taking care of any technical things that are going on. So if something comes up and you need something, please send a message to Ivan or myself. And because Matt's going to be our sage on the stage today. And so we will introduce Matt in just a few minutes. But for right now, I'm really excited to share a video with you from our Cultural Affairs Officer from the U.S. Embassy, Elizabeth Smith.
Hola a todos. My name is Elizabeth Smith, and I'm the Cultural Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica. I'm delighted to welcome you to this series of webinars made possible through the dedicated efforts of the experienced educators at the Institute for Collaborative Learning, the Ministry of Public Education, and the U.S. Embassy. Teaching English is both a rewarding and challenging task, requiring continuous growth, adaptation, and learning. These webinars will serve as a valuable platform to expand your knowledge, exchange ideas, and explore new, innovative methodologies. Together, you will reach new levels in your teaching practice and inspire your students to excel in English. I encourage you all to actively engage, to participate wholeheartedly, and to share your own experiences and perspectives. By collaborating with one another, you can build a vibrant network of English teachers in Costa Rica, united by a common goal to inspire your students and shape their futures through the power of language. I cannot thank you enough for your hard work and dedication to your profession. On behalf of the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica, I welcome you again, and may this series of webinars be a productive and interesting experience for you. Buena suerte en su proceso de aprendizaje. Adelante.
Thank you so much. And now we have Ana Isabel Campos, our National Advisor for Primary, to also give us some words of welcome. Welcome, Ana Isabel.
All right. Thank you so much, Mary. Welcome, dear teachers, to this webinars. Thank you so much to the Institute of Collaborative Learning, Mary Scholl, Ivan Suazo, and Matt, that is the facilitator of the workshop today. Thank you so much for your work, for your commitment as well, for your, courage. I would say courage and willingness to do the best for our teachers. Let me tell you, dear teachers, that we had a meeting some months ago with the Minister of Vice Minister, and he was saying that our students cannot speak. Or he was like, kind of challenging us in terms of that. And so we said, okay, we're going to try to emphasize in the next or coming webinars the development of oral skills in the students. So that's the reason why we are having the series of workshops. The first one focused on how we can develop tasks that can enhance students' oral skills. And then a second one that is connected with how can we assess oral skills. Assessment is a challenge, we know, but it can also be something that can motivate our students to learn, to improve. And I think that Matt will be working on that to you on the second one. So I hope, dear teachers, that you can get the most out of these two workshops. Please be here all the 2 hours so that you can really, from everything that will be advised and at the same time shared with you through the presentation, and also in the second one that you will have, I think, on the 25th of July. This workshop will be again repeated in the evening time. So if you know colleagues that cannot join at this time, or you want to review again, you can join. I think it's from 6 to 8. So I am inviting you also to do that. So thank you so much to the U.S. Embassy. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Smith, for your collaboration, for the support, because this is what help us have these opportunities. Also, I don't want to forget everything that Manuel Rojas Mata did so that we could get this calling signed up. We can have this space. Remember that now the Ministry of Education is not given a lot of spaces. So please really take that into account and try to get the most out of this. I wish you the very, very best. And I will be, I will try to be here sometimes because we are visiting right now Cañas region. But I am very happy to see right now almost 700 teachers connected and joining. So get the most, really, from the bottom of my heart. I am very happy you are here. So have a great time and a lot of learning. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you so much. We're so grateful that you're here with us and grateful for all that you've done. And thank you again for reminding us of the work that Manolo has done to make this happen. It really is a unique opportunity. So, all right, with no further ado, I'll pass it over to Matt. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks so much, Mary. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Elizabeth. And thank you, teachers, for being here. I'm really excited for this afternoon opportunity to connect with 743 of you. That's so exciting to see. It's so cool of me that we can say as a community of teachers, hey, you want to learn a little bit about teaching? And 750, we're getting there. We're making our way to 800. 750 of us turn out to learn more. So I'm excited you're here, and I'm excited that you're excited to learn. Today's webinar is called TheStage, TheCoffeeTable, and TheStudio. And I'm excited to talk and share with all of you about differentiating opportunities for and developing the oral skills of young learners, and see what ideas we can share that can hopefully make our jobs easier as we work on the challenging task of getting students to speak. I think there's a big challenge in there. When I think about that profile of the student who says, sí, yo entiendo mucho, pero al momento de hablar, nada, profe, right? Like, that's a challenging profile to work with. As someone who's been teaching in the classroom for over 10 years, I feel that challenge. And so I'm hoping we can come together and connect over that challenge and see what can make our process of helping students like that. Alrighty. I would like to invite you back to the Zoom chat once you've finished the registration form. And I'd like to invite you all to participate in a little community builder with me. As we get into thinking about what we can do as teachers to support the development of oral skills, I want to do a little activity share. What's your favorite kind of speaking activity? And it might not be what you consider most effective or whatever, but what's the one that you like to do most in terms of your preferences?
I opened up the chat, Matt.
Thanks. I was just looking for that button. I know for me, I have a lot of background in theater. I did a lot of acting and drama program growing up. So like Giselle and Verdiana are sharing in the chat, I really prefer role plays. I like to give a kind of creative, interesting role play. I like to make sure my characters have specific desires, right? So instead of just you're a family, right? You're a parent who wants to go to a healthy restaurant, and you're a child who wants to eat fast food, and creating drama and tension there. That's really fun for me. Oh, look at chat go. There's nothing like 777 participants and active teachers light up that chat. Let's see what our group is seeing here. I'm gonna scroll back up to the top and slide through quick. We got a lot of role plays and interviews, some jigsaw activities. That's a fun way to create a meaningful reason to talk, right? And to connect it with the other skills like reading. Impromptu speaking, right? Kind of like the one-on-one role play. Giving presentations is one way to practice speaking. Working with projects, kind of small group, you can be speaking with your team and then speaking to other teams about your projects. Creating audios and videos, right? One way we can integrate technology in the classroom is having our students record themselves speaking. And that opens up this whole interesting space where they can self-assess their own speaking. They can listen and go, how does it sound when I speak English? And build on that own process of noticing. I don't know if you've noticed the shift, but I've noticed the shift that futbolista as like the #1 dream job among our students has slowly been overtaken by YouTuber. And I feel like now streamer is the #1 job I hear my young learners aspiring to. And so I see how giving that space to make a video is connecting with those long-term aspirations that some of these students might have to produce digital content. Well, I want to give you a quick overview of our webinar series. Today's webinar, like I said, is called TheStage, TheCoffeeTable, and TheStudio. And we're going to talk about oral production and how we can support it as teachers. This is the 3rd of 4th showings of this particular webinar. If something happens and you get disconnected, come back in the evening. You can join up and catch the rest of the show like someone did yesterday. Also coming up, split between June and July, we've got a webinar about speaking fast and slow, which will be strategies for assessing the oral production of young learners. I like to think of it as the second half of today's presentation. Once we create speaking, what are the different ways that we're looking at it? How are we assessing it? And how are we sharing that assessment with our students? Then coming up in June and July, we've got 3 series of webinars that are open to all MEP teachers of all ages. And that'll be on teacher well-being in the classroom, and reflection and lesson planning. Again, a friendly reminder, there's multiple days and times listed, but there's only one webinar for each color there. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Matt. Like I shared before, I've been teaching in the world of ESL for over 10 years now. And 6 of those years, I was living and teaching in rural Costa Rica, in el limbo de Peñas Blancas. Legalmente San Ramón, pero es San Carlos de Corazón. Y de clima también. So I like to introduce myself by saying that for most of those years, I've really seen myself as a partner of all of you. I would be working in our community English school, Centro Espiral Maná, and teaching young learners on the weekends. So the same students that you all were working with in El Tanque and La Tigra and La Fortuna, Monday through Friday, they would come off to our center on Saturday and Sunday. And that was really a lot of what energy I was working with, was students who were getting a lot of great vocabulary and grammar and all this powerful learning and wanting to put it into practice and find their way up onto stage and put it into practice speaking. So the more I worked in teaching in that context, the more I realized on Saturday and Sunday, I didn't need to teach the students any new vocabulary. My curriculum really removed all additional vocabulary, all additional grammar, because my students were already getting that Monday through Friday with you all, right? And so I really focused my limited time with these students I might only see for 1 or 2 hours a week, on how can we get this language in action and speak it, right? No new vocab, no new grammar. Let's just speak what you've already got. And so from that experience working with the students that we've shared, I'd like to share with you some of the ideas that have helped me create that space, right? Once we have a head full of ideas and words, how can we put it into practice and do something with it? And that really ties into one of my central beliefs about education, which is that I believe in promoting sustainable habits of learning that empower learners to guide themselves as they play, build, explore, and create their futures. And I think when we really start chasing those spaces of fluency and freedom with our speaking, that's when our learners really start exploring not only who they are, but what can they do with language? How can English be a bridge and an opportunity for them in their life? So here's an overview of what we're going to be thinking about today. Roy, I'm glad you got a coffee table up there. Just having my afternoon cafecito. So if you're feeling a little tired, feel free to pull up a glass with us. Share a mug. You can't access the registration form. Oh no, thank you for sending a message in chat. If anyone has any technical help, if you could find Ivan in the participant list and send a chat to him, he is happy to help you with any of that. And he'll be able to give you some one-on-one support. There we go. So today we're going to be talking and starting out with a little self-assessment of our creative preferences. And then from there, and also maybe even our coffee preferences. I'm a geisha guy myself. From there, we'll think about different spaces of learning and how we can create different spaces in which speaking can happen. We'll think about the elements of oral production, being accuracy and fluency, and how we can work towards helping our learners develop both. We'll think about what developing fluency in language learners sounds like, so that as we're trying to guide students to speak, our goal of what their speaking should sound like matches where they're at developmentally. We'll think about what are the elements of a fluency task and how we can structure a lesson and a month towards developing student fluency and taking the language and ideas that are in their head and making them fluent speech. So here's that self-assessment. I'm going to share with you a series of 3 would you rather questions. And here is question 1. Would you rather teach a large class, tutor a small group, or offer private lessons to one student? Maybe you prefer more than one of these. Maybe you'd rather do neither. But if you had to choose one above the others, which of these 3 options would you choose? Right? I see 822 of you here today, and I'm like, all right, let's turn these stage lights up and let's get shining. I like a large class. I like the possibilities that emerge when big groups of people come together. We got some stagers out there, a lot of small groupers. It seems like we all agree. I think 1 student is definitely the hardest number, right? Especially when it comes to speaking, because okay, first we talk, now go practice with, I don't know, talk to the door or talk to the wall. There's no one else to practice with. So I agree with you. And I think number 3 being the hardest of the bunch, maybe. I always say 1's the hardest number and 100 is the second hardest number, right? It goes from there up to the huge class and then back down. All righty. I'm going to go to chat and write in question number 2 so we can mark off where we're answering question number 2. If you haven't had a chance to share in chat, just make sure you make a mental note of what number you answer. Alrighty, so question number 2. Would you rather give a conference presentation, share ideas in a weekly teachers group, create resources individually to share with other teachers in your region? Now, I'm not asking you to choose extra work. This is not a promise to do this. But let's say your school wanted you to step into a leadership position. And so they gave you 1 class free to have some time to work on one of these things. If you got to choose one of these to do, which is the one that you do first? Even if all 3 sound nice to you, which is the one that's your biggest preference? The project you'd start on first to connect with the community of teachers around you. I see a lot of folks excited about the idea of a weekly teachers group. A little time for some venting, a little time for some sharing. Sounds nice. And even some folks who like the idea of some asynchronous groups sharing resources. Awesome. I'm going to go into chat now and I'm going to write question number 3 so that we can go on to the final question in our self-assessment. And that is, would you rather do a live TV interview with a journalist from La Nacion in a coffee shop, or create a blog or vlog about exciting new things you're trying in your classroom? Imagine that you got nominated to be Teacher of the Year and they wanted to do some stories about you. Live TV interview with a journalist, or creating a blog or vlog. Ooh, 3? We got a lot of bloggers and vloggers out there. You guys are looking to get online with this. Exciting to see little windows into your class and what strategies are helping you bring English alive in your class. I'm a strong 2. Melissa. I don't know if Melissa really wants coffee or maybe she just loves reading the newspaper and love to have that printed copy to hang up on her wall. Interview from a journalist, but not from La Nacion. I respect that. I make no comment as to anything in there other than that was the one name of newspaper that I remembered from my time living in Costa Rica. So you can interview with any journalist, Canal 6, Canal 4, whatever channel you want, ESPN, wherever it goes. I respect that choice too. Really, what I want to think about with you in terms of these 3 questions is, as I was designing these and thinking about what number 1, number 2, or number 3 would be, I was thinking about 3 prototypical contexts, 3 different kinds of spaces. And so I want to show you this next slide and ask you if you feel like one of these spaces tends to be where you prefer to be creative. Which of these spaces is where you prefer creativity? Do you prefer the stage? Do you prefer the coffee table? Or do you prefer the studio? When I think about the stage, I think about being up in front of a group, having all eyes on you, having a platform to share your ideas, and potentially getting lots of feedback from lots of different people. When I think about the coffee table, I'm using that more as a metaphor other than saying drinking coffee, which I do love. I'm thinking about that space where we're gathered together in small groups. We're sharing ideas with one another. There's a lot of interaction. There's a sense of eyes on me, but also the intimacy of being in a small group, while lots of folks are also off invested in their own small groups. And when I'm thinking about the studio, I'm thinking about an artist taking space to find solitude, to really explore their creativity on their own. And when they feel like they're ready to finally publish their work, then sharing it with the outside world. Now, I really want to highlight that I consider all of these a preference. This isn't some personality test. I don't profess to have just discovered something deep and powerful about your personality that I'm revealing to you. And it's very possible, like I see some people answering with multiple numbers. Maybe there are different contexts up here and you are comfortable with many of them. And your preference could be different depending on what type of activity you're doing or what company you're in. That's all very true. I know for me, I prefer the stage. I don't know if you've gathered how my energy has been slowly rising as the number of participants here has slowly crossed from 6 to 7 to 800. Or if you can see that little boy in the slide up here, who, if you haven't figured out already, that's me. When I was 7 years old, I would literally move aside the coffee table in my living room, set up a stage, take a banana from the kitchen, and call my whole family in and say, "Come see the magic show with the wonderful, amazing Matt." And like 4 or 5 days a week, I would make my family sit through a magic show. Right? I love being on stage. And as I've looked back on my time being a learner in the classroom, I saw that in a lot of moments, I was able to be the star of the class or at the front of the learning because I liked being on stage. I could feel moments when other of my peers didn't want to speak and thought, well, I'm comfortable talking right now. And so I'm thinking about how these different spaces might affect what it feels like to speak. If we think of speaking as this creative activity, putting myself out there and potentially inviting other people to offer feedback or even judge me for the way that I speak, thinking, which of these contexts do I prefer to be creative in? And how can being in these different contexts affect the way that I am creative? Maybe I speak differently when I'm in a studio-like environment, and I speak in another way when I'm around the coffee table. Maybe I get stage fright, and so if you only ever see me on the stage, you're never going to hear me speak. But if I could invite you into my studio, you'd hear tons from me. So now I want to share that question that's been really inspiring for me with all of you. And I'd love you to share your ideas in chat or even raise your hand and we can give you permission to unmute and share your ideas out loud. Which moments in your classrooms give learners a stage to perform and share their learning? What types of activities or what parts of the day do you feel are stage-like? Angie shares activation of prior knowledge. So right at the start of the class, when you're eliciting ideas, as students are sharing ideas for the whole class, that is one stage-like environment. If I call on a student and say, Rodrigo, what do you see in the picture? Everyone's attention looks over at Rodrigo. Well, maybe not everyone. There's always a few students distracted. Most people's attention goes over towards Rodrigo. And even though he's not standing in front of the classroom, that little moment is a tiny stage, right? Now, I can also invite students to the front of the classroom to give a performance or share a role play that they've been practicing or creating, right? I can have a stage in the front of the classroom, or I could create a tiny stage at a student's desk by calling on them. I could have students show their drawings as we're sharing. Checking answers. Yeah, when we're checking homework. All right, who has the answer to number 4? Well, maybe one of the reasons your student doesn't want to raise their hand and say something, why you might have to call on them, is they see that moment as a stage, right? They think the answer to number 4 is he was, but they're not 100% sure. And they're nervous that if I raise my hand and say, teacher, the answer to number 4 is he was, and they're wrong, maybe their friends will laugh at them. Maybe they'll lose points for being wrong. And so that space being stage-like might be something that helps you understand how your student is looking at that moment. Now, when playing, yeah, play offers a lot of stage-like spaces. I feel like that's one of the calls, in that in play, there's a lot of moments when you get to be seen for who you are in play. Making presentations or oral practices at the beginning or end of class. Nice. Now I have another question for you. Which of your students shine on stage? For privacy reasons, just share a first name. But when you think about the students you're working with right now, is there a particular few students who you think, these are my students who shine on stage? I know if I invite this student on, I know for me, Dylan is one of my students who shines on stage. When he has the attention of the class, he lights up. He tries his hardest. And if he doesn't have the attention of the class, he might try to create a stage in the back. He might do something crazy over there because he wants a stage to be on, right? So one of the ways that I learned to work with Dylan is thinking, I have to create stage-like moments for Dylan to feel the attention of his peers, because that's a space where he shines. And if he's shining in my classroom, he's going to like being in my classroom. In chat, I'm hearing that Aiden and Ethan, they shine on stage. Sebastian, Santiago, Thomas, Sophia, Anna, Ian, Natalie, Sophie, Nathan. It's cool to think about all those students, imagine them shine in your classrooms and what incredible things they might be able to do with everyone's eyes on them. And also thinking about how in that moment, when those specific students are shining on stage, everyone else can be learning from them. Those students are going to be at their best, and the other students are going to get to hear models of near peer English at those peers' best, hopefully. Brian, Moises, Tiara, Robert, and Julian are shiners. How about to our next space of learning? Which moment in your classrooms give learners a coffee table to connect with others and share their learning? Which types of spaces feel like those more smaller, intimate moments where it's more about connection and sharing ideas than attention focused in one direction? Also, the idea of competitions, right? You can have a competition among a group, right? They could be playing a small board game or doing some kind of competition at their table, and that might create that kind of fun coffee table-like space. Or they could be competing between groups, and maybe there's a sense of unity here and rivalry with other tables too. Studying for spelling contests. Yeah, if they're in small groups and practicing their spelling, that takes this individual studio activity and transforms it into something that could be done in small groups. And now they're speaking and listening to each other as they're practicing for the spelling bee. Which of your students shine in small groups? When it's time to be in that small group, who are your students who really shine? I'm thinking about two of my students. One of my students that I'm thinking about is Sami. Sami is a born leader, right? When it's time to play, she's like, we're going to play family. I'm the mom, you're the dad, he's the brother, you're the baby, you're the dog. Let's go to the play, right? At recess, Sammy is the one that organizes what everyone's going to do. And I think that leadership energy can sometimes be really helpful around a coffee table. I can know that when Sammy's in a small group, she's going to help guide her group towards the objective. I also think another one of my students who shines around a coffee table like space is Juan Diego. Juan Diego is so laid back, he's easygoing, and he's everyone's friend. When Sammy says, let's do this, Juan Diego says, okay. When Sammy says, let's do that, okay. And I think both of those types of energy are like leading at the front of a group by making decisions and putting forth ideas, and also leading from behind a group by agreeing to things and being flexible. I think both of those are different leadership styles. And I think both of those skills shine around a coffee table. In chat, y'all are sharing that Loana and Stacy are some of your coffee table shiners. Tatiana, Jeremy, Sebastian, Crystal, and Suriana. One person's sharing those students who really like English. Yeah, I feel like, to me, this word share comes up. When I'm in that small group setting and I'm talking to someone, it feels like we're sharing. I'm giving you something, you're giving me something. There's this exchange of ideas. And so if I really love English, when I'm in a small group, I'm feeling like I get to share it with my peers. I love sharing things that I love with folks, right? I love board games. So when friends come over to my house and I get to teach them a new board game, I love it. Sharing what we love is nice. And this coffee table-like space empowers the students who love something to share that passion with their peers too. How about the studio? Which moments in your classroom give learners a studio to contemplate and produce their learning individually? Which are those kinds of spaces that really give a lot of independent think time? Time to tinker and time to really be lost in thought. In chat, Lucy is asking, are you going to share the presentations? Yes, absolutely. Before the end of the day, we're going to give to you a link to a resource site. There, you'll be able to find a recording of this webinar. You'll be able to find a PDF of the slideshow. And you'll also be able to find a collection of articles, blogs, and videos connected to this topic. So if you want to keep reading and researching, I've been looking all over the internet for resources that I think will be helpful to you. So we'll share that website with you and you can continue learning, following your curiosity. Thanks, of course, we're happy to share. In terms of studio space, when doing kind of practice worksheets, Fabian's sharing when taking a quiz or a test, very much a studio-like space. I think about my studio shiner, Dylan, and I'm like, yeah, when it's time to take a quiz and be quiet and independent, my student who shines on stage struggles to be in the studio sometimes. Having them be quiet for 20 minutes is a real struggle because they have this preference for a different kind of space. And not that I'm saying, okay, so Dylan gets to just talk, right? That's just a reality of my challenge interacting with that learner, is their preference would be to do something else. But right now we've got to be in the studio to do an individual test at the end of the year. I'm also thinking like a lot of projects and take-home work create a studio, right? What is the type of work that works well at home? And who are the type of students who shine at the studio, right? Who is someone who can be working all on their own? I also, to confess to you, I really like being in the studio. For me, if I'm not on stage, I want to be in the studio. I never studied in a library in university. I couldn't go to a coffee shop and work. I feel like when I work, I want to get lost in my writing. So I love that studio environment there. But I could also see how some people, they need the feeling of others around them. They need the sharing of ideas to be productive. Thinking about our students who shine in the studio, we're thinking about Ezekiel and Mariana, Mia and Samuel. They shine when they can ask something using English. Yeah, sometimes I'll have students come back to me and go, profe, este fin de semana mi familia fue a un restaurante y yo pedí la comida en inglés. And that moment when they got to do something away from class can feel like a moment where they were shining, right? They had that real opportunity to try and go there. Someone's bringing up this concept that there can be some students who shine in all the different spaces. Absolutely. Again, this is just a preference. I don't think of these as specific categories, right? The next slide is not me saying, okay, here's a test so you can figure out exactly which box your student fits into. I think human beings are complex things. I think we don't fit easily into tight boxes. So I think it is possible to prefer all of these things, right? And this isn't going to be a key that unlocks my challenges with every student. But I think this has helped me reflect on certain moments. Sometimes I've looked back on an activity and thought, right after class, how come when I asked that question, everyone was silent? I heard them all talking in pairs and they were telling their partners the correct answer. But when I asked them, nobody spoke. And this thinking about spaces has helped me reflect on those kinds of moments. I can go, okay, my students have a level of confidence that it's empowering them to talk in small groups in that coffee table-like setting, but they still need more confidence before they're ready to display that learning on stage. And now I can kind of frame in what's an activity I could do to make them feel confident and get lots of celebratory feedback that's specifically noticing what they're doing right. Making presentations. Yeah, a lot of like the ways students could use technology on their own could feel like that studio-like space. So the next question I want to ask you is, how much of your class is on stage? How much of your class is around a coffee table? How much of your class is in the studio? If you think about the 50 minutes of your typical English class from your student's point of view, how much time is that student spending in moments that feel on stage? How much time is that student spending around a coffee table? And how much time are they spending in the studio? I know for me, sometimes when I'm working, especially with younger learners, I feel this pull that most of my class has to be on stage. Because when they're very young, they're less independent. And when I have everyone sitting in a circle and I'm calling on them one by one, I can have the most control over the class, right? So sometimes in those younger learner spaces, I feel that ability and just say, well, the classroom management is easier when the whole class is a stage, right? I can keep everyone focused, everyone doing the same exact activity. And I feel that, and there's been moments when I've done that too. Also, one of the students I'm thinking about most when I'm thinking about these three different spaces is Ana Belen. Ana Belen came to my weekend classes for 3 years. Ana Belen never spoke English to me. Never. Not once did she speak to me in my classes. After about 1.5 years, she started talking to her peers, but she mostly just listened. Ana Belen would go home and speak in English with her mother. One time I got a voice note from her mother saying, "Ma, fíjese, estoy discutiendo con mi hija, quien tiene 4 años. Ella dice que la palabra ojos se pronuncia eyes, y yo pienso que se pronuncia is. ¿Usted me puede decir cómo pronunciar la palabra?" Y yo mandé, ay, qué emoción que ella está aprendiendo tanto. Su hija tiene razón, es eyes. And it was like this big breakthrough moment for me. A child who had never spoken English to me was at home correcting her mother and was right. Now, I went on to see Ana Belen learning in a Zoom classroom. She was shining in a Zoom classroom. And I looked at her and thought, she's in the studio right now. When she comes to my English classroom, she doesn't feel comfortable. I can see it on her. She feels like people are looking at her and she feels on stage all the time when she's in the classroom. And that might be one of the reasons why she's choosing not to talk to me, right? That feeling of shame or embarrassment might come there. But then when she's given this studio-like space of being at home, she shines. And so if I'm working with preschoolers or first and second graders, and I say my whole class is going to be mostly on stage because the classroom management is easy or easier, not easy. Classroom management's never easy, but it might be slightly easier when it's on stage. Well, then students like Ana Belen are going to really struggle with me. Students who prefer the studio are going to have very little space to shine. And so I think all of these spaces are important. And I think as you're asking yourself this question, if you think there's one of these spaces that you do the least, I would invite you to try and do a little bit more of that in your classroom and make sure there's a balance of all of these. Because something that's really important for me to remember too is that our students are young. They still don't really know who they are. Just because someone has a preference to be on stage when they're 8 years old doesn't mean that's exactly the person they're going to be when they're 20, right? They could grow and evolve as a person. And someone who's shy when they're 8 could also blossom and grow into someone who shines around a coffee table. So making sure that we're providing these diverse opportunities, I think, is really crucial with young learners. One, it's going to give all of them their own space to shine, right? If I never got to see Ana Belen speaking in the studio, I would never have been able to observe her learning. I would have thought, I failed that student. She did not succeed in my English class. She didn't learn. But that's just because I hadn't yet created the space that she needed to show me what she'd learned. And when I found that space with the help of her mom, I was really impressed with what I could see. I think this question is also really powerful with speaking skills. One of the things I've seen most common when the question comes up of how do I get students speaking and how do I assess it is I'm going to have one student come to the front of the class, or maybe two. They're going to do their dialogue and then they're going to sit down while I grade. Again, I think in terms of classroom management, that moment is very facilitatable, right? Now, I also think if that's the only way that I'm assessing speaking, well, my students who shine on stage, those names you were sharing earlier, they're going to get really good grades on speaking, right? Because this is an environment that lights them up, right? They're like me. They see that audience out there and they get bouncing. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to crush it on stage. But your other students who don't shine on stage, who are maybe more nervous on stage and would prefer to be around a coffee table, they're not going to get assessed at their best. And so I think it's really nice to make sure that as we're working with speaking skills, we're balancing the type of space that we give. Because if all of our speaking tends to be the time we're spending on a stage, we're going to feel like, well, how come only some of our students speak, right? Well, it's not that the other ones don't want to speak. It's that maybe they don't want to speak on a stage. Maybe they need a different type. I remember back to those questions and very few of you chose to give a conference presentation. In terms of your own creativity, you might not always want to be on stage. And so I think of that speaking moment as creativity and say, am I giving the moment to speak creatively in all of these different ways? Do y'all have any questions or comments about these spaces of learning before we move on to the next topic? Yeah, Enid, I think your comment is great, right? It's something as simple as a change of the space can really affect speaking, right? Sitting in chairs all facing the same direction can feel like a stage, even if it's just a classroom. But getting students to sit on the floor and suddenly start looking in different directions, physically changing the space can really change the emotion that comes along with it. Taylor says it's a game changer. I feel you, right? And I think this is giving me a way to say, what are the other ways that I can make that shift? How can I make a moment specifically not feel like a stage so that other students have their time to shine too? So I want to think about the elements of oral production. In order to speak, students need accuracy and they need fluency. Those are the two necessary elements. They've got to have speaking skills in both categories. And so I want to make sure we're all clear on what those categories are and how we practice them. I've got a question for you on the board. In regards to oral production, what is accuracy? Is it A, understanding all the words you hear? B, speaking correctly with very few mistakes? Or C, speaking quickly and sounding confident? I think that in regards to oral production, accuracy means speaking correctly with very few mistakes. In that bouncing GIF on the side, you're seeing two of my students do one of my favorite critical thinking speaking activities. They've all got little paper cards with different agricultural products of Costa Rica, and each of them is a farmer, right? You're a sugar farmer, a coffee farmer, a rice farmer, and they have to trade with other people to get the food that they need for that week. So they go around trading these little paper cards, trying to get all the diverse food that they want. And so when Benjamin says to Angie, rice for coffee, please? And then they switch. If Angie gets the card and he said rice, but the card has sugar, well, that doesn't work. That's a failure of speaking and communication. So speaking correctly with the few mistakes is that element of accuracy. In order to be speaking experts, students need to be able to do that. How about in regards to fluency? In regards to oral production, what is fluency? Let me write question 2. Oh no, I changed the lettering on this one. Good, we're here. Good to go. Is it D, speaking with a native-like accent? E, listening to fast audio with high comprehension? Or F, speaking easily with few pauses and communicating a message? I thought it was clever, my shift of the letters, so I'd know you're answering the next question. I'm glad y'all following along and reading close. I'm seeing most of the key answers come in an F, and I'm agreeing with you. That's how I define fluency. Speaking easily with few pauses and communicating a message, right? It's about that speed and that flow. Having a healthy speed and flow that makes it possible to be understood. All right, next question. Can you have accuracy without fluency? Yes or no? Is it possible for someone to speak accurately, but not fluently? I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to see if I can speak accurately, if I can say the correct words in the correct order, but if I can do it without fluency. So I'm going to say the correct words in the correct order, but at a speed that makes understanding hard. Hi. What did you do last weekend? All those words were in the right order. But if I'm sitting with you at a coffee shop and I'm talking like that, you are either falling asleep or you're trying to finish my sentence. What did I do last weekend? What did I eat for dinner? It's like that sloth in the movie Zootopia, right? There is a speed where things become so slow, where I'm focused so hard on being perfect that now I'm not speaking. And I was exaggerating, right? Kaylor, I know I'm being exaggerated to prove a point. So my students don't speak like that either. But I do think it's possible to have lots of accuracy and very little fluency. Honestly, when I meet those students who say, Profe, es que entiendo mucho, pero no puedo hablar, I think those are students from this slide. Those are students who have high accuracy and very low fluency. If I give them a worksheet, they can answer all the questions correctly. If I have them thumbs up, thumbs down, and tell me about these words, they've got all the definitions perfect. But if I ask them to stand up and talk with these words, those are students who have accuracy but not fluency. So that's something that's helped me work with those kinds of students. When I've got that profile of student who's having trouble speak it, that's a student who has enough accuracy that they're ready to try speaking, and they need more time to practice fluency. They've got a lot of column A, and they're ready to start developing in column B, which is great. I think that's typically how the process of learning works. We start out by building accuracy, and then we start building fluency, right? So when I hear that, I think, okay, great. And it helps me know, where is this student in their process of learning, and what do I need next? It's not just that they need motivation. They need motivation and an opportunity to start developing fluency. Is it possible to have fluency without accuracy? I'm seeing some mixes here. I love when I ask a question and half of my class picks either of the answers. I think this is a sign for me that there's a learning moment to explore. I'm going to give you another example of some second language use that you've probably heard. This is my impersonation of a newlywed couple who is lost an hour and a half away from La Fortuna. And they've just stopped at the pulperia in your town, and they're asking for directions. Hola, mi amigo. Yo, mi esposa, and Caro, going to La Fortuna. Donde La Fortuna? You know what you have to say. That's when you look at them and you go, hey, my friend, congratulations on getting married. You're going to go, and they're like, oh, God, thank goodness you speak English. They're so happy they found you, right? That's someone who they're speaking. They've communicated their message. You knew exactly what they need. They need directions to La Fortuna and hopefully in English, right? They're speaking fluently, but their accuracy is really low. I find this type of speaking comes up when someone has a high communicative need, right? Typically, we see this in babies, right? Mama, chichi, right? That's not the right way to say that, baby. That's not how you say it. But that's how the baby communicates what they need to get at, which is, excuse me, mother, I am hungry and would like to eat. They're communicating that idea fluently, but they're not being accurate in that moment. And it's okay. So I don't typically see this in my young learner students in a second language classroom, right? Usually they don't have tons of communicative need and not a lot of vocabulary. It's usually the opposite. I think this is what I typically see in a second language classroom in Costa Rica. Most of my students had a lot of accuracy and needed help developing the fluency, right? Whereas like in preschool, that's really where, or like lost tourists, were where I saw students who had high fluency, low accuracy. All right, next question. What kinds of speaking activities help students develop accuracy? If my students have low accuracy with a specific set of vocabulary, what kinds of activities can I do to help them develop more accuracy with these vocab words? Elvis and Melissa jump in with songs and singing. Yeah, I think those are a type of activity that are definitely about accuracy. Whenever I'm doing any kind of choral repetition or singing along with a song, I'm trying to sound exactly like the model, right? Yariela puts a big category on that, controlled activities. I think that's exactly what I would say. When I want students to develop accuracy, I need activities that have a single right answer, right? Unscramble this sentence. Which form of the verb to be goes in this blank, right? Say it out loud. All of those, if I'm having students answer by speaking in a controlled activity, that's helping them develop their speaking accuracy, right? A lot of folks are adding in presentations. I think that's a really great thing to identify. If I'm going to give a presentation on the history of Juan Santa Maria in English, I'm going to sit at home, write it out, put it on cards, and try to memorize the cards. And then I'm going to come up to the front of the class, be a little nervous, and say, in 1856, Juan Santa Maria was born at and I'm going to try and say it exactly like it was in my memory. So even though I'm standing up in front of the room and I'm giving my presentation, that kind of speaking activity is my student trying to sound exactly like the script. Whenever there's a script in speaking, it's an accuracy activity. Your student is focusing on, yo quiero decir todas las palabras en el orden correcto, right? You give them a script and you guide them towards accuracy. You give them a fill in the blanks and you're guiding them towards accuracy. So as you're teaching new language, these are the types of activities we want to do. If a student absolutely doesn't know a word and I want to teach brand new language, I've got to start by developing their accuracy. So I start with controlled activities, or maybe I start with a script, but that's just the beginning of developing accuracy. Taylor says, I have real concerns right here. What are your real concerns? I'd love to hear it and talk about it. Yeah, choral readings and chants. Again, there's a model. And if the student is trying to emulate a model exactly, we're focusing on accuracy. All right, next question. What kinds of speaking activities help students develop fluency? As we shift, if I want to help students not just develop the skill of saying the right words in the right order, but speaking at a healthy speed, communicating and being understood, what types of activities develop speaking fluency? I'm seeing a lot of folks sharing ideas that were from our community builder, things like role plays. Absolutely, that's going to be speaking fluency. Doing an interview, that could definitely be a speaking activity, because if I don't know what questions I'm about to be asked in my interview, well, I have to think live in the moment and speak fluently. Some of these answers, I definitely see them as speaking tasks, but I don't know if they're definitely fluency activities. When I think of students doing dialogues, again, if there's a script and my student is just trying to copy a script, I don't see that as fluency, right? My student who says, fine, thanks, and you, they don't speak those words fluently. They just know how to copy that sound and they know where it goes, right? Like, I know how to say, wakarimashita, which means, yes, I understand in Japanese. I don't know anything else about Japanese. That's the only sentence I know how to say. So I don't know where the subject in that sentence is. If I wanted to say I don't understand, I have no idea how to translate it. It's just a sound. Wakarimashita. Okay. Right? I don't know anything more about that. So I can make the sound, but I don't think I can speak that phrase fluently. I don't know the pieces. I can't use it creatively. So if your students memorize a script, well, then they know how to speak these exact sentences in this exact context. But as soon as the context shifts, suddenly that script doesn't work anymore. At some point, they need to go off script and start speaking. And that means they're going to have less accuracy. As you are less controlled with the language and the student has more freedom to speak, they are going to make more mistakes. That's okay. Developing fluency involves making a lot of mistakes. Their accuracy is going to go up, and then you're going to get them to start speaking, and their accuracy is going to dip for a bit before it comes back up. But they need that time to make those mistakes as they're trying to speak freely. So when I think about students doing a live role play, okay, you are at a business and you're trying to return this television because it's broken. Go. If I have my students start speaking, now we're practicing fluency. If I have them sit down with their partner and write a script, now we're practicing writing. And then when we speak our script from memory, we're practicing speaking accuracy still, right? So I need to create activities where there's no script. Sometimes I will specifically tell my students, no, don't write. No quiero que escribes no, right? I will prevent writing in that moment because I know they want to. My students want to write a script and they want to memorize it. That's safe. If I memorize my script and it's up here, I'm going to speak perfectly and my teacher is going to give me all the points, right? Safe. But I know that if my student is going to be able to get a job in a hotel, walk up to someone on a random Thursday and say, hey, miss, it looks like you're lost. Can I help you find your room? And respond to a real situation, they need to practice speaking live and spontaneously. I saw a hand go up. Does someone have a question they want to ask? I think I can unmute you and you can share. So it seems like there's a little confusion around which types of activities help students develop accuracy and which types of activities help students develop fluency. When I'm trying to design a task that's specifically focused on fluency, right? Again, I need to spend a good amount of time in the classroom working on fluency, or else my student won't ever get to that place of speaking fluently. These are the elements I'm looking for. I think the more of these elements that describe a task, the more fluency that's there. So first, students have a clear purpose they are speaking to achieve, right? If I just say, okay, talk to your partner about a dream vacation, there's not really a purpose, right? Teacher, when am I finished? How many minutes? 2 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes dream vacation, right? There's no purpose there. The student doesn't know when they're done. They're waiting for you to tell them you're done. If I take a group of 3 students and I say, all of you are going on a vacation, you all need to decide on one place to go and 3 activities you're going to do on vacation. And all 3 of you need to agree. Now they have a purpose. That group knows when they've finished speaking because they've agreed on a vacation and they have 3 activities. And because they have a goal, now you can leave them alone and they know where to go. They're not going to keep looking at you to go, profe, finish, profe, finish, right? Their conversation has a goal, and that's going to guide them to fluency. It's the same thing that guided my imaginary baby and my imaginary married couple to speaking, right? The lost married couple, they needed to find La Fortuna. They got to get to that honeymoon suite, right? That's a real communicative need. And so that's pulling out their fluency. And in your tasks, when you give students a goal, that's going to pull out their fluency. Element number 2 of a fluency task is that it's connected to students' real worlds. So I like the idea of interviews, right? I think interview is a great structure to get fluency to happen. But I also think my 10-year-olds don't want a job. They barely want homework. They don't want to interview for a job. That's not part of a real 10-year-old's world, right? So maybe I'm doing a unit on interviews, but I think interviewing to work at a supermarket is not really part of a 10-year-old's job today. What's part of their real world? I would argue that if I'm trying to make an interview task for 10-year-olds, what I would choose that's most in line with their real world is you're a brand new superhero. You're interviewing to be a new Avenger. The other Avengers are interviewing you, and you're going to answer questions about why you should be the next superhero added to the Avengers, right? I think that connects with something that my 10-year-olds know a lot about. And so because it's an experience they've had or they know about, they're ready to talk about it, right? You ask a student about Minecraft, they light up. Es que los clips y yo estoy comprando y combinando las cosas. So, or something like Elvira saying, going to the supermarket. If the speaking is connected to a task that they have real life experiences with, it gives the student more ideas to be able to speak. They can speak for longer because more of their past experiences and memories are inspiring them, right? So next up, the next element of a fluency task that for me is really crucial. I always want my fluency speaking to involve interaction, right? That means one student speaks to another student, and then there's a response, right? First, I ask a question, and then my partner comes up with a new idea based on my question. Then I respond to what my partner says, and they say something based on my response, right? That's interaction back and forth, right? If I just say, okay, talk to your partner, I want you to tell your partner, what are 3 activities you did last weekend? Go. Okay, I'm partner A. I'm going to say, last weekend, I swam in the ocean. Last weekend, I read a book. Last weekend, I ate chismo. And I do my thing. While I'm saying that, my partner is standing there, and the only thing they're doing in their head is going, last weekend, they're practicing, right? My partner's not listening to me. They're just in their head going, last weekend I did this, last weekend I did this. I need to give them a reason to listen to each other and interact, okay? I need to say, listen to your partner. I want you to find one thing that is similar that both of you did last weekend, and one thing that is different that you both did last weekend. Listen and find one similarity and one difference. Now they have to listen to each other. They have to interact. Last weekend, I swam in the river. Did you swim in the river? No, I did not swim in the river. Did you play soccer? Yes, last weekend I played soccer. Last weekend I played soccer too. That need for interaction is going to pull up more fluency. It might make them make more mistakes, but it's going to give them more reason to keep a conversation going, right? They have a specific role and they have a reason to listen. Or Elaine is saying when students are creating a story to go, like they're popcorn storying, in an activity like that, they have to listen to what other people are saying, right? And so when there's fluent speaking along with fluent listening, that's creating this feedback. I saw a hand raised. Do you want to share a question out loud? Disappeared very quickly, but I'm happy to unmute you. Number 4 of the element of a fluency task is that students speak creatively. This is another reason why I'm a big fan of making sure there are some speaking moments in the classroom with no scripts. The jobs that our students are looking to get with their English, well, sometimes you're in a call center and you're just reading off of a script. Hi, sir or ma'am. Thank you for calling Amazon today. How can I direct your call? But sometimes the person says something to you and you need to be able to listen to what they say and respond creatively, because every day at your job is going to be different. And so I need to make sure that in my fluency tasks, there's some level of creativity. Students are putting together the words they've already learned in brand new orders. And that's going to help them practice that skill of creativity to respond in real situations. And finally, that students speak spontaneously. This is also a positive spin on not having a script. But again, I think going up and giving a presentation is a great way to practice high-level, accurate speaking. But if I want to practice high-level, fluent speaking, I need to speak spontaneously. I need to be coming up with ideas and saying them out loud. It's why when we talk about the accuracy of healthy, fluent speech, first language speakers typically speak at about an 85% accuracy rate, right? When I speak English, when many of y'all speak Spanish, we're making errors 10 to 15% of the time. That's just an effect of us speaking fluently. Fluency introduces errors. And so I want to have many of these elements in parts of my class so that my students can develop fluency. Alrighty. I have another question for you. Which of the following chunks of language sound the most like utterances of a primary student for you? And you can choose more than one. Which of these options are things that you might imagine hearing some of your students say? Choose as many as you'd like. Which of these sounds like students? Primary students, to be specific. Is it a long pause and then happy? Is it, hi teacher, I happy? Is it, today I am happy and sleepy? Or is it, I'm feeling very happy today because it is June and my birthday is coming up. Would you like to come to my party? I wish, right? When I hear that, I'm like, Bruno, tell me about your family. And then he's like, yeah, we were born in New York, but I moved here when I was 4. And you're like, oh, that makes sense, Bruno. I got it. Yeah, okay. How's Spanish class going? And now, okay. And there's a reason I can figure that out about Bruno, right? It's not just an accident. These quotes are me imagining the students that fall into these categories of developing language learners. When linguists study people learning a language, they've come up with these 4 categories to see how fluency grows over time. For the first 6 months, we've got students who are in pre-production, right? Or up to about that time. That's also called the silent period, right? Any language learning typically starts with some amount of time where you're demonstrating little to no production. And so it's important for me to know if I'm working in some of the first years of English language learning, right? I'm a preschool, a kindergarten, a first or a second grade teacher, and I've got students who are just starting out. Some of my students are going to be silent. And they're going to be silent not because I'm doing the wrong things, but because I'm doing all the right things, right? If I'm working with someone who's in this first stage of learning, it's okay to let them be silent, right? That's actually what I should be doing, is giving space for pre-production. After pre-production comes early production, and that's about the next 6 to 12 months of regular exposure. Now, again, these numbers could very much change, right? We don't know in the study how many hours a week were these students getting English class. Maybe your students get more hours a week than the students in this study. Maybe your students get less. So these numbers are a general idea, but I like to think of them more as big periods. Now, that next 6 to 12 months of learning, English language learners are going to start to be able to speak 1 to 2 word phrases, right? That's what comes next. That's why when I walk into a group of second graders and I say, hi, everyone, how are you today? And at the exact same time, everyone goes, fine, thanks, and you? I go, that's not their fluent speech, right? They can't speak fine, thanks, and you. Let's think about the grammar there. Fine, thanks. That's a subject omission. English doesn't typically omit the subject. The grammatically correct sentence would be, I am fine, right? I am. So in spoken English, we're allowed to omit the subject in that casual sense, but technically it's incorrect. So fine, thanks, comma, and you, tag question. How many of you are teaching tag questions to second graders? That's complicated vocabulary. Hey, students, did you know if you put and you at the end of a positive sentence, you can turn it into a question just by changing your inflection? That's not something I'm teaching to second graders. So when I hear that second grade class say, fine, thanks, and you, they can say it. They can repeat it, and they can know when to say it. They can do all of that. But that doesn't fit into what developmentally their level of fluency is, right? That's why they don't also just start saying, and you, I'm from Costa Rica, and you, right? I like hamburgers, and you. They don't start using fine, thanks, and you fluently because it's outside of their range. They're not ready for that yet. So when I'm designing fluency tasks, yeah, Elvira, it is language acquisition, right? So this is how language is learned. And I think understanding these phases can help us understand what we can expect from our students, right? We teach English to support the language acquisition process, and students are acquiring language as they're learning. Sure, Angie, ask your question, and I'll see if I can link it to our topic today. So when I'm working with students at that early production level, right, when I'm in the first cycle of primary, and I know most of my students are at early production, where 1 to 2 words is about the most they can speak at a time, then when I'm setting up a fluency activities, I'm trying to design a model where everyone can participate using maybe 2 or 3 words at a time, right? Okay, you're the mom, you're the child, you work at the grocery store. Mom, you're going to tell the child what to go to the grocery store and buy. Child, you're going to go to the grocery store and buy it. Here, you're going to take the money at the grocery store and send them home. So, okay, now I'm going to model it. Okay, Brian, grapes, please. Grapes, please. Thank you. Mom, grapes. Thank you. Right? Speaking at that level, that's fluency in this early production stage. I don't need to push these early learners to be speaking in elongated sentences. That's beyond where they're at developmentally. It's on the way. That's where they're going. But first, I need to get them speaking in conversations in tiny little chunks. And then, but that kind of structure to answer a greeting in our current syllabus. Fine. And you? Yeah, Anya, and again, I'm not saying that it's bad to teach a phrase like that. Some phrases we learn and we want to memorize like that. But when I look at that phrase, fine and you, if I'm teaching second grade, that phrase to me is about the most complicated language I would imagine a student who's been studying English for 3 years could say, right? That's about at the highest level there, right? So I know everything else. If I want my 7-year-olds to have a conversation, it's not going to sound like, hey, Brian, how are you today? What did you do this weekend? Well, I'm doing great, Jeremy. I went to, right? That's more, even when we listen to them in Spanish, they're not always speaking in those long of chunks, right? And they've been speaking Spanish for years longer than English. So they're way earlier on, right? We get our 7-year-olds, and our 7-year-olds might be reaching fluency in Spanish. They're able to speak in full sentences, but they haven't been speaking English for 7 years around the clock. And so developmentally in English, they're earlier on. So we need to set up these kinds of purple activities I was talking about. I try to set these up and also focus in on 1 to 2 word phrases, especially when I'm working with early production. Oh, here we go. My 3-year-old son has listened to you speaking English during 2 years at least, and he gets too many words now. However, in his mind, he started to speak English, but he isn't.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for taking the time to read my question and also
Of course.
for answering. As I told you, my 3-year-old, he's been listening to me speak English since he was like smaller, and now he understands much of things that I say to him, and he thinks that he is answering in English, but he's not. He's just, I'm sorry for this expression, but he's speaking like a gringo.
Can you give me an example? Like, say something you might hear him say.
Yeah, he would say something like, jugar en la cocina con los juguetes, mamá. So you're playing in the kitchen? Yes, I am. Yes. Yeah. And I start saying whatever he says in English. I mean, when he speaks in Spanish using his accent, I would repeat it in English, and he would go like, yes, yes, mommy, yes, but he wouldn't say it. So I don't know if I've done something wrong.
Yeah.
Because right now I'm trying, let's say that this new approach that I'm using with him, I want to implement him in the class, because I've seen that it works, because he understands.
Yeah.
But if my students are going to start doing the same, mamá, jugar en la cocina, con carritos, room, room, I don't want that. So what can I do? That would be my question. Thank you.
Yeah. So Angie, I think your question connects to something that a lot of us see as teachers. The thing I think it connects to is when parents ask us, how come I'm not hearing my students speak English at home? Right? One of the things young minds are doing is called compartmentalization. I'm going to write that in chat. It's a big word, and I want to make sure I'm getting compartmentalization. So when young learners are associating languages, they associate them with spaces and with people. Oh, this is a place where I speak English. It's my English classroom. Oh, this is a place where I speak Spanish. It's my Spanish classroom. And so some of what might be going on, Angie, is your son knows you're bilingual. And so in his mind, there's not this rule like, oh, when I'm with her, I have to speak this language. There's a family who lives in the town where we were living in Costa Rica, and the dad would only speak to Spanish in the son, and to speak in Spanish to his son, and the mom would only speak in English. And so this son would only ever talk to his mom in English and his dad in Spanish. And if his mom then, when he was 7 or 8 years old, asked him something in Spanish, he would answer her in English, right? But if he invited a friend over and that friend only spoke Spanish, he would start talking to his mom in Spanish. So for me, when I look at that example, I think that what's going on is your son might be speaking to you using a mix of different languages because he hears you using a mix of different languages. My partner is from Honduras, and when I speak to her, I know I can switch back and forth between English and Spanish, and we're going to keep communicating. So I do sometimes without noticing it. It just happens. And so that might be what's going on in your son's mind. And because he's developing, it sounds like confusion, right? Where his mind is still trying to figure out, when is it English? When is it Spanish? And there's just a little bit more mix up there. What I've heard is that the research shows that students who are, or children who are growing up bilingual, at any given time, if you look at just one of their languages compared to a child who's just learning that language, they might appear to be a little bit behind. But when you take into account the fact that they're learning 2 languages, they've actually learned more than children their age. They have a bigger vocabulary and bigger grammar. It's just split across 2. So hearing that your son's 3, a lot of mine would just be to hear your worry as a mother and just say, be patient, right? He's 3. He's got plenty more time to grow up. And also think too, is there anything you can do to create spaces with your student and say, oh, hey, we're going to go here. And while we're here, let's only speak in English because our friend is here and they only speak English, right? Or with your students, hey, I brought this cool stuffed animal to class, but this stuffed animal only speaks English. So today, while we're telling stories, let's all speak in English. So I can introduce a character or a person to a context to try and play with compartmentalization. And that might shift them to what language they're choosing to use. Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. I think I'm gonna try that with my kid and also with kids at school. Thank you. And I'm gonna look for that the weird word you just said. I wrote it down. So I'm
Compartmentalization. It's really cool. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this slide. I think this is the range most of our primary students are going to be in. And so as I'm designing these fluency tasks, I'm mostly thinking 1 to 2 word phrases, maybe short sentences, but whenever they're speaking fluently, I'm going to hear lots of mistakes. And that's okay, because most of my students in primary are around this 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years total. That could be their whole time in primary school, right? So when I'm designing a task and modeling it for them, I want what they hear me say to sound like this kind of English. Okay, so the last thing I want to share with you is how I structure a lesson towards fluency. And I'm seeing some comments in chat about some of the challenges in terms of overall time. I recognize that. And one of the things I want to say is that looking at something like this, the reality of learning a language is that it takes time. And if a student spends less time learning a language, they're probably going to learn less of that language, right? That's just a reality. There's no reality that says, well, you're going to have half as much time to teach students, but we want you to teach them just as much, right? There is an understanding that with less time comes less space for learning. But one of the things I think we can do, especially when we're in low contact hour spaces, right? I'm coming at you as someone who I would have class with students for 3 hours once a week, but 30 minutes of that was a break. 15 or 20 minutes of that was mostly just game playing that was very little English. So it was 2 hours or less that I was seeing students every single week, right? So that's about what you're saying, 3 contact hours, right? If you have 3 40-minute classes, then you and I saw our students about the same amount of time. Now, one of the things I did to make sure that even with a short amount of contact answers, that my students could be getting to a point of speaking is making sure that I balanced my activities. Some of my activities would be about developing accuracy, and some of my activities would be about balancing fluency. Because I hear your call, Alexander, but I also know that that decision of how many classes are we going to have a week, it's not a decision that I make as a teacher, right? I show up to class and I teach, and I make decisions about what I'm going to teach and how I'm going to bring the curriculum to life. And one of the challenges I have to hold is that there are some decisions about my learning space that will be made for me, right? So I want to share with you an idea that has helped me, even in shorter contact hour scenarios, work with students and balance instruction, right? And I know if I've got students 2 hours a week, I can do less with them than if you give me 4 hours a week. But how can I take that 2 hours and make it productive and make sure that at the end of my 2 hours a week with that student, they're leaving able to do some amount of speaking as well as just understanding? That there's not just receptive skills, but that in that short time, we also get some productive skills. The framework that really helps me with that balance is ECRIF. I found that when I follow this process of learning, it helps me split up time between the development of accuracy and fluency. So this is a framework that comes from Mary Scholl and her colleague Josh Kurzweil. And it looks at learning from the point of view of the students and says, for a student to learn something new, let's imagine for a student to learn 5 pieces of vocabulary. Well, then my student has to go through each of these steps with each of those words. These are the internal processes they have to do to learn that. The first one of them is the student hears new language and realizes they don't understand. I say firefighter, and the student goes, huh? That moment of, huh, is the student having their encounter. When we realize there's something we don't know, then we're able to start learning about it. After students encounter new language, they can start clarifying it. That's when students make simple choices and decisions about the new language that they hear, considering it if it's correct in form, meaning, and use. I show a picture and say, is this a firefighter? Yes. Is this a police officer? No. Right? You can all tell that I'm in grade 3, unit 3, community helpers. So I'm still the one using the language, right? One of the things I notice in the encounter and clarify steps is I, the teacher, am the one producing the language, and my students are listening and interacting. They might be saying something simple like yes or no, is or that, pointing, and they get a lot of chance to hear me say the language. I like to begin my speaking lessons with a mini silent period. For these 2 activities in the beginning, I'm not going to challenge my students to speak yet, or at least to speak the new language. Maybe I'll do a schema activation and they're saying words they've already learned before. But in terms of today's new vocabulary, I'm the one saying that for encounter and clarify. When it's time for the student to remember, that's when the student starts moving the language from their short-term memory to their long-term memory, and they begin using it in simple utterances. When I show that picture card and say, who is this? And one of my students raises their hand and says, firefighter. And I say, yes, Raphael. In that moment, Raphael has started to remember. He has pulled that information of how to pronounce that word and what it means out of his memory, and he's spoken it. For a student to be able to answer that question out loud, they need to be able to remember that word, right? So I give them lots of time to listen to me saying the words, and then I push them for a chance to remember. And I see one student start to remember, and then another student and another. And slowly, these students are all moving through this process individually. Even though I'm facilitating activities for the whole group, different students start remembering at different times. After they've started remembering, then it's time to start internalizing, right? One of the things that helps with internalizing and remembering language is connecting it to prior memories. If you want your students to remember a word, not just for next week's test, but next month and next year, they need to connect that words to a lot of different things, right? Connecting that word to one picture flashcard is an important first connection, but they also need to connect that word to their family, to their favorite television show. They need to connect that word to their imagination. And when students start connecting new language to their prior memories, feelings, and lived experiences, that's when those words really start internalizing and become language that the student's not going to forget. After that process has happened, then students are ready to fluently use language. This is when I can invite them to have these kinds of interactive conversations where they're speaking creatively and sharing their thoughts. So I want to give you a sample lesson plan. I want to go back and imagine what this sequence of highly controlled, somewhat free and free activities looks like for a specific topic. Okay. And again, I think this is helpful because in the first part of ECRIF, this is where students are going to develop a lot of their accuracy. But starting here, when I start challenging them to speak, first I have them speak one word, then maybe 2 words at a time, or 3 or 4. And then finally, by the end of the lesson, I might try to have them speak that in a complete idea. And this is where fluency is developing. Melissa, within the next 10 minutes, I'll share a link to the resource site where you can find this presentation, a recording, and a bunch more resources to explore this topic. Also, we're going to share a feedback link. I hear a lot of you having ideas that you want to share with the administration at MEP. And in that feedback link, there's a box that says, what else do you want to share with the advisors at MEP? So if you have really strong feelings and you've had experiences in your classroom that you want to make sure other people know about, please go to the feedback form and share it there. We're going to collect all of that information and share it with our MEP partners. So we want to help be a bridge to connect your very real concerns with the people you want to hear you. And I also know a lot of those folks aren't here today. So putting it out in the chat helps us hear you, but I want to make sure you're here outside of this meeting too. And you can do that in our feedback form. Alrighty, now on to my sample ECRIF lesson. Matt, how can we make sure students get developed fluency when we have so many words and structure to teach in 1 week? The next slide I'm going to show you, Angie, I'm going to let you peek, but then I'm not going to talk about it yet. I'm going to show you a calendar and how I would lay out ECRIF over a month to slowly work language towards fluency. Okay, here's my sample lesson about community helpers. It's not feeling vocabulary. Sorry about that typo. Ignore that. Grade 3, Unit 3, community helpers. So for my encounter activity, I show students vocabulary image cards and I say these words: police officer, firefighter, mailman, doctor, chef, and they're listening. Some of them might be repeating, but I'm not asking them to repeat. I'm just showing them and giving them a chance to silently observe. Then we move on to a clarify activity. I show a card and say, is this a police officer? And my student says, yes. Is this a chef? No. My student is using very simple language to interact with these new words. And I'm repeating these words so that by the end of the encounter and clarify, my whole class has heard me say each of the new vocabulary words 10 to 20 times. I'm going to go through those cards a lot because after they've heard me say a word 10 times, they might be ready to pronounce it. After they've heard me say that word 15 times, they're going to be even more ready to pronounce it correctly, right? Now I move on to a remember activity. I show one of the cards and say, what is this? And the students think and they go, police officer. Yes, right? And then I put them in small groups and I say, okay, one student is going to do a gesture. And the other students are going to guess the community helper. Chef. Ah, yeah, right? So now again, I'm challenging students to speak that word and remember. That's the first time in my lesson, and I want them to speak just that one word all by itself. Now I want to connect it with our real world. I want my students to share their preferences. I got it. I'm going to have them think about what jobs they like and what jobs they don't like. Now, the first idea I had was in the future, I want to be a police officer. I don't want to be a firefighter. I want to be a chef. That's really hard, right? That's way beyond what I expect in the fluency of my third graders. So I'm going to give them a very simple model. It might not be how I would speak in my professional life, but I need my third graders to hear an example of fluency that fits into that early production box where they are developmentally. So the conversation I model is, I don't like police officer. I like firefighter. I like chef. I don't like mailman. And so by modeling in a very simple way, I'm giving my student a near model that they can emulate as they start sharing their own opinions and making personal connections. I could also have my students listen to their classmates, collect the data, and make a graph presenting the information. So now they have a reason to talk to everybody. That's what you can see in this picture here. My students have a little graph and they're writing in a happy face or an X based on whether their partners like or don't like that specific job. This gives them a reason to talk to everybody in the class. And now they're going to practice that short speaking many times over, right? And now having a big class is a benefit, because if you have to interview the whole class, now you've got to practice 30 times, not just 15 times. And now as we approach fluency, you get more meaningful repetitions. Then maybe for the fluency activity, I create a role play. You're a teenager and everyone in your family is telling you what job to do. And you're going to have to listen to everybody and then decide what job you want. So I've got my ECRIF sequence. What's the first thing I'm going to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to teach it all. I'm going to set aside 30 minutes in the middle of one of my lessons, and I'm going to do the whole sequence: encounter, clarify, remember, internalize, fluently use. I'm going to do that to pre-assess my students. How fluently can students speak at the beginning of my unit with this topic? And then I'm going to give them a week focused just on accuracy. We're going to repeat the activities every day, or maybe every other day, depending on how your schedule works. But for that first week, I'm going to repeat the encounter, clarify, remember activities. We're going to focus on developing accuracy. Then in week 2, I'm going to start skipping the encounter activity and instead do the internalize activity. And maybe I come up with 2 or 3 different internalize activities. So it's a little different every day, but these are the stages I'm going to work with. So my students are still practicing mostly accuracy with a little bit of fluency. Starting in week 3 or 4, now they're practicing mostly fluency, right? So that then by the end of this month, the language that they started encountering here is something they've finally moved into fluency, right? So this might also get me chances to recycle activities so that as I'm trying to plan for 6 classes a day, I'm able to give students a chance to try something again, right? If I'm going to teach 8 clarify activities or 9 clarify activities, I could design 3 different activities and just cycle through them. Clarify 1, clarify 2, clarify 3, clarify 1, clarify 2, clarify 3. And that's going to get me these 9 spaces. So I'd love to hear your questions, thoughts, and inspirations. And there's space for you to share that on our feedback form. So you'll see those links in chat to both the registration form and the feedback form. And while you're clicking through and sharing with us your thoughts there, I want to also show you what we've got going on at the resource site. I'm going to send one more link out to chat so you have access to it. Yeah, so if you have any questions about the topics we talked about today, I'd love to hear it. And I'd also love to show you the resource site. So if you're curious to learn more about how you can support students in the development of fluency, you can head on over here. That link will take you to our overall 2023 MEP webinars site. You can find that we've already finished 3 webinars for preschool. And if you didn't get a chance to join us for those, you'll be able to click into any of these, watch the recording, and then fill out a virtual attendance form. That'll let us report to MEP that you've been there, and you can have access to up to 10 hours of asynchronous training if you'd like. You can also scroll down here and click on Primary Webinar 1, which is what we're studying today, TheStage, TheCoffeeTable, and TheStudio. Here shortly, you'll find a recording uploaded of our webinar. You can find the slideshow I've been sharing with you today and also fill out virtual attendance. And below that, you can see a collection of articles and videos connected to this topic. So if you want to learn more, right, maybe your students are speaking in short phrases and you want to make them speak longer. This handout from the US State Department is really great. It says it's for preschoolers. I think there's something in here that's applicable for all of us. And it's a way to transform a thin conversation. Do you want to play with the boat? Yes. What color is it? Blue. Who will ride in the boat? The man. To how can an adult react to guide the child to slowly speak longer and longer? Which toy do you like to play with? The boat. Ah, your boat is the favorite. What will you do? So I think this strategy is really nice in terms of supporting speaking. And all of these resources are things that I handpicked out to go along with this topic. Well, thank you again, everybody. I'm a teacher too, and I always like looking across this room at all of y'all, teacher to teacher. And I know your weeks are incredibly busy. I know you give the gift of your time to your students and your classrooms and your schools. So the fact that you all have found 2 hours in your busy weeks to connect with us is something I really value. And I want to thank all of you for your time. I know your time is precious and your time is full. And so I see all of that, and I see that as even greater of a gift in what you've given to be here with us. So thank you all so much. I hope we can connect again in the future. And I appreciate everything you've shared.
Matt, thank you so much. We so appreciate it. So appreciate it. And I hope that, I saw some people that I know I think there's always times where we're going to look at what's hard, what we can't do. I'm just curious and hoping that you all also have been able to find something that you might experiment with. Maybe not everything, but something. Is there one idea from today that you might try out? So we hope so. And we look forward to hearing from you, those that feel like sharing. And good luck with this. Good luck with this. And please fill out the feedback form, because that is going directly to MEP. So they will get that from us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.